We've been talking about this chart in the last video, which I said to you, I think is one of the most important charts of the last century, okay? Tells a story about history, tells a story about social implosion, tells a story about fascism, economics, how societies collapse, the whole nine yards. It tells us the story in a nutshell of how America ended up where it is, okay? And so here's the chart, all right? And again, what this chart shows us is that people's incomes, including their compensation, their benefits, the whole nine yards, as a share of the economy are back to Great Depression era levels, okay? I didn't make that. If that startles you, I didn't make this chart, okay? This chart comes to us from Federal Reserve data. It's the most authoritative data we have in the economy. It hasn't been corrupted or tainted by Trump yet. And you can see that this data series begins during the Great Depression because that's when we began gathering data like this to help us understand how to lift ourselves out of the depression, okay? So if you look at the two pink circles, the one on the right is where we are now, and the one on the left is where we were during the Great Depression. And if you look at the gray line running through the pink circle on the left, that is the Great Depression, right? So sort of startling, right, when you really think about it. So this chart is telling us very clearly, people's incomes as a share of the economy are back to Depression era levels. Okay, so in the last video we discussed how this chart answers for you this eternal question: how is the economy really doing? Well, now you know. Okay, now you know beyond the spin, the BS, the hype, the nonsense coming from the talking heads, all the kind of confusion and haze the columnists manufacture for you. The answer is very simple. People's incomes are back to Great Depression era levels. If you don't think that's catastrophic, if you don't think that's cataclysmic, then maybe you need a reality check or a sanity check or something. Okay? So it answers that question. So we talked about that in the last video. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit more about this question that is on a lot of people's minds, right? Are we headed for another depression? All right? And people are asking this question for a number of reasons, right? Obviously, one is AI taking all the jobs. Another one is climate change. I think the biggest one is that people feel like something has gone super wrong. And they sort of are mystified, right? Life has become so unaffordable, especially in America, that it feels like we're living living through something like a depression, but we don't have a good word for it. And that's exactly what this chart shows us, okay? And to say that, to ask the question, well, are we headed for another Great Depression? This chart is telling us something really powerful, okay? Which is that for the average person, their share of the economy is already in Depression era levels, okay? Now, here we come up against what I call bad economics, okay? A lot of our economics is obsolete, guys. The way that we think about the economy, the way we think about finance, is obsolete. And the problem with American economics, the reason it doesn't do a good job anymore managing the economy or thinking about it, is it doesn't want to reckon with the fact that a lot of our concepts are obsolete. So what I mean by this is that technically the economy is not in a depression, right? If I go out there to American economists or right New York Times guys and I say, guess what? We're in a new depression. They'll laugh at me, right? Because the economy is growing, all right? So we have these two opposing facts before us. The economy is growing, but people's incomes as a share of the economy are sliding, and they've slid so hard that now they're back to Depression era levels, okay? So how can both these facts be true? And which one should we focus on? Should we focus on the fact that the economy is growing, that the pie is getting bigger? Or should we focus on the fact that the average person's slice of the pie is back to Depression era levels? Which one of those do you think is more important? I think that the second one is a lot more important because what's really happening, what this chart tells us is really happening here is something that I think we all intuitively feel, right? But this chart is confirmation, it's proof. It's a fact that everybody should know, which is that the economy grows, all right, fine. But that growth is being taken by, right, like billionaires, mega corporations, and maybe there are 1,000 guys who are their lieutenants, and they're all getting mega rich. But the average person's share of the economy is sliding over time, and not just sliding, imploding. What else do we call the average person's share of the economy going back to Depression era levels? What else do we call that except an implosion? What else do we call it but a catastrophe? All right? So these two opposing facts, the economy is growing, the pie is getting bigger. but the average person's share of the pie is getting smaller. It's imploding to depression era levels. All right? Both of those things are true. But bad economics, I think, only focuses on the first one. And I say that's bad because, listen, billionaires and their lieutenants and these guys that are capturing more than 100% of the gains in the economy, which is how everybody else's share of the pie is back to depression era levels, they're a very tiny number of people, right? It's like 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Everybody else, hundreds of millions of people, are who are in this chart, right? The chart that is growth, which is going up, is only, right, 10,000 people, whatever, small number. It doesn't matter exactly what the number is. The point is it's vastly, enormously outweighed by the number of people in this chart, right? Which is like hundreds of millions of people. So it is bad economics to say the economy is growing when, in fact, no, the economy is not growing. 10,000 people or whatever are getting mega rich, but the economy, hundreds of millions of people, for them is shrinking. Their share is going back to depression era levels. Okay? I hope that makes sense. It's really important for you guys to understand, because one of the things I want to give you in these videos is the sword of truth. Okay? I put that in sort of biblical terms, but I mean it, to cut away the veil of fog and confusion and BS that Americans are hit with. It's just garbage thinking out there these days, all right? And I want you to see through it. So I'm arming you with these facts so you know, all right? And you can and you can decide what to do with these facts. And we'll come back to that. That's kind of why I created Havens. This is a different story, right? So this chart, right, really highlights the fact. And so sometimes we talk about a K-shaped recovery or something, right? It's not about that, guys. Even that vastly understates what's going on here. And here we have a real problem. We have a conceptual problem. We have a paradigmatic problem. It means our paradigm has failed. If the paradigm says, well, an economy is growing because 10,000 people are getting richer, but hundreds of millions of people's share of the economy is back to depression era levels, which one of those is truer? Which one of those is more accurate? Which one of those is more a valid way to think about the reality of an economy? I think clearly it's the second one. Right? For obvious reasons. More people, that's the reality of an economy, right? So part of what's going on here is that we're not technically allowed to call this a depression. And if we do, the typical guys will lash out at us, right? Pundits, intellectual pundits, wannabes, American guys, right? The guys in American power. Right? The corridors of power. They'll lash out at us and they'll say, well, technically it's not a depression. It doesn't fit the criteria of a depression. A depression means everybody is getting poorer at the same time, so the economy is shrinking. And they're right. That's the technical definition of a depression, okay? But are we going to let the economy get off on a technicality, right? Like, if somebody's out there, doing something horrible, do we let them get off on the technicality, right? The technicality is not what's important here. Okay? The technicality being that we can't call it a depression just because everybody isn't suddenly getting poorer all at once. Hey, those 10,000 guys at the very top, they're still getting super, mega, ultra rich, richer every year. So hence, we can't call it a depression, and we have to say the economy is growing. How can that be the case, man? Hundreds of millions of people are seeing a smaller and smaller share back to depression era levels. That's the reality, right? Which vastly outweighs the first one. So bad economics. And we're getting hung up on a technicality. We can't call it a depression just because a very tiny number of people are getting mega, ultra rich, right? They're going to become trillionaires in the next few years. So it's not a depression for everybody else. Guys, that's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. We should demand better from our thinking, okay? So the technicality is correct, but in a false way. We can't call it a depression because the technical definition of a depression, everybody's getting poorer together and it has to exceed 10% over 2 years. It doesn't matter, right? These are arbitrary definitions. We made these definitions a century ago during the Great Depression. Our challenge now is creating a paradigm with more sensible explanations and descriptions and events that describe what is happening around us. So what do we call something like this? Right? Where we have phantom growth that creates the illusion that an economy is growing for everybody, And if we say the economy is growing, we imply that everybody is sharing in those gains. But the truth is, nobody much is sharing in those gains, and people's incomes are back to Great Depression era levels. What do we call something like that? Well, technically, they're right. It's not a depression yet, right? But it's something catastrophic. It's something cataclysmic. 90% of people, 75% of people, whatever the exact number is, are experiencing a return to Great Depression era level incomes. Okay. What do we call that? Should we call it a phantom depression? Should we call it a ghost depression? The term that I settled on was invisible depression. Okay. And I wrote about that over the last few years, right? And sort of, right, I'm blacklisted, so nobody pays much attention to me these days, right? I got written off for being too dangerous, for predicting that America was going to collapse into fascism. And that's fair, man. I'm not like the rest of those dorks, right? Really, I don't care about economics and politics and finance. I care about music. I often say this to you, right? That's Freddie Mercury's old synth. I love that thing, all right? I care about economics and politics and finance in the human dimension of it. I care about it in the sense that it affects people. I don't care about the rest of it. It's nonsense that an economy is growing when we can all see clearly that things are going badly for the average person, right? It's false. And we all have to see through that. So the reason that I'm trying to teach all of this to you is so that you are armed with the truth. You have answers to these questions, which are omnipresent in America, and nobody really cuts through the noise for you, right? I think it's really important for you guys to learn about this now, okay? So I called all of this an invisible depression because it was very clear to me through statistics like these that people's incomes are already going back to depression era levels. And so it's true, technically, we can't call it a depression, right? And there's always going to be that one annoying guy, right? Whether he's a New York Times columnist or a CNBC talking head, or it doesn't matter, right? He's working at some dork-ass think tank in DC. He's going to say, oh, you can't call it a depression because, right, there's 200 guys in the economy who are trillionaires. Okay, dude, fine. But what do we call it for everybody else who's back to depression era level incomes? Do you see what I mean? So the paradigm needs to be reinvented. We need new concepts, new terms, new explanations. And when we have those, then we will be able to make progress. You see, because the only way we got out of the Great Depression, it wasn't called the Great Depression at the time, right? When it began, right? People's lives just cratered. And through a lot of work, we ended up calling it the Great Depression and understood that it was a real phenomenon. And then we began the work of lifting ourselves out of it, okay? So all of this stuff, the conceptual work, the paradigm, seeing reality before our eyes, being able to describe it, conceptualize it, really matters. We can't make progress, ever, if we're getting hung up on this dumb-ass technicality. It's not a depression. You know, that dork is sitting there and he's telling us it's not a depression, guys. Dude, people's incomes are back to depression era levels. How are we going to dig ourselves out of this hole if you keep insisting, dork, that it's not a depression? Do you see what I mean? Like, I'm giving you a bit of a pointed example. Like, maybe I'm scolding you a little bit even. Do you know the kinds of guys that I'm talking about, right? And the problem is they're not just like, MAGA is one thing, right? They love all this stuff. But it's the guys on the other side who are the dorks who get hung up on these technicalities that are blocking any kind of progress from happening. Because if they're arguing about the technicality all day, how are we ever going to agree that this is a problem and we need to fix it, right? Make sense? All right. That's a lot. I'm getting hot under the collar, guys. I don't like I said, I care about the human dimension of this a lot. Okay? So I guess one thing I love apart from music. And I don't like seeing people suffering like this. It hurts me. It hits me deep in the heart. Okay? Because I know charts like this also represent immense amounts of human suffering. It's one reason I created Havens, right? So for those of you who right, have been longtime readers and fans and friends, and I've gotten to know you over the years, that you don't end up trapped by this. All right? So that's a lot for one video. All right? I'm sorry. That was a lot for one video. I hope it helped make some sense for you out of the mess that we're in. Okay? And where we really are. Okay? Comments, questions, leave them below. Thank you.